How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Dead Jester Productions podcast. I'm your host, Josh, or J Moskers, episode number 238. Special guest this week is Colton from the Just Dumb Enough podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Happy to have you on. Excited. Why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself? What it is you got going on?
Yeah, so I am a host of the Just Dumb Enough podcast, which is kind of a scattershot show that introduces people to new topics or ideas or lifestyles or careers, whatever, that they otherwise wouldn't know very much about. It's kind of that, I'm just dumb enough to start this conversation and find myself very quickly in over my head. And so every week's very different. I think we did like OCD followed by like bees or something. So like they're so random and scattered that I think it's just fun to have a variety like that. And so that's kind of what we do there. Outside of that, I was a paramedic for 12 years before jumping out and then went into podcasting for whatever reason.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, no, happy to have you here. Where do we want to begin? I guess for the first question I ask is how you got into being a paramedic. I'm always curious about stuff like that.
Yeah, I actually started in the fire service, which, for people that don't know, they're vaguely
People
separated.
Just fires. Yeah.
Yes. So at 16, I joined a local fire department as what they consider a student. The problem is that it's such a small department that a student is basically a full-time firefighter.
Oh, jeez.
And so, at 16, I was running like just as intensive calls as, all the 40-year-old dudes around me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of fell in love with it. I figured like, this is a great purpose. This is kind of how I could see my life going. And so I put all of my energy into that, graduated high school early. I was an EMT before I was a legal adult.
Yeah.
And just started going, as hard as I could on it. And that was kind of the start. I saw some pretty wild stuff, and I guess none of it deterred me, which is just a kind of personality. And a lot of people say like, I could never do that job. And I'm like, it's just a job.
Yeah.
Like it's nothing that crazy.
Nobody ever says that about like what I do with marketing. Nobody ever goes, I could never do that. It's too much. People will just be like, that sounds like boring.
I don't know. It takes a certain level of skill that I don't know if I have what it takes to market to people.
Yeah. No, it is fascinating. I know, like, I don't know how many shows there are at this point of like firefighters or like medical shows. You have like, I know like I have family members that watch them, like the Chicago Fire, Chicago PD. I forget what some of the other ones are. Do you ever like, have you ever found interest in watching those like dramatized shows about it, or do you find it to be not realistic or anything?
So I used to watch Scrubs a lot, which is like the hospital show.
Yeah.
And it's like medically accurate, although kind of slow paced, but I found it entertaining because it had some comedy.
Yeah.
My family kind of all watches those shows. And so I am in the realm when people are like, oh yeah, let's go watch 911 or whatever. And usually I watch it and I'm like, this isn't how you do it. That's crazy slow. I don't know why this would be your solution to the problem.
No.
I'll like, they gave like the most obvious symptoms of a stroke or something. And I'm like, okay, so they're having a stroke. And then 20 minutes into the show, they're like, my God, this patient's had a stroke. I'm like, yeah, man, you gave like the 3 hallmarks of a stroke. Like, how did no one else see that?
Yeah, it's out of my area of expertise, but I see a show like I don't watch them personally, but like we'll go to visit family and they'll watch them, and it's just one, it's on every hour of every day it seems like, but also it's just there's so many of those shows make me think like this is just setting a bad example for how like police and like firefighters and medical staff, like it just makes all of them look bad.
Yeah, I can't imagine the amount of times I've seen those shows and they're like, we're gonna break the law today, and I'm like, what
Yeah.
Hold on.
Especially with like the police shows where it's like we got to get dirty to fight crime. It's like, man, you are just coming up, you're kidnapping people, you're holding them hostage and beating them up. Like this is terrible.
Yeah. On the amount of times I've heard the medical shows be like, I'm not trained to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway with no guidance. I'm like, that's not how that works at all. Like, we don't just
Yeah.
guesswork stuff.
Yeah. It's crazy. What was the training like for you to get to work in the field of a paramedic? How?
So my fire training, I think, was like 2 months, 3 months of
Mhm.
weekend courses. And then I did an accelerated course for my EMT just because I wanted to get right into it. And so that was
Yeah.
14 days straight of
Oh,
like
jeez.
12-hour days. Um, and then you have to go through state certification. After having an EMT, I had to do an associate's degree to
Mhm.
qualify to be a paramedic, which was like 4 years worth of schooling when you include all of my like internship and practical time. I think I had to
Yeah.
have something like 1,200 field hours before I could even take a test.
Mm.
So I did a lot of free work, I think, as a paramedic before I did any real work as a paramedic. But you know, it's a lot of training time, you know, practicing, and it's what it should be. I think we do an adequate amount of time and
Yeah.
studying to do what we do, but it's a lot.
How long do you have to does it take before you're able to do an internship?
Let's see. I had to get through most of my coursework
Mm.
and then half the school load, so I think probably 3 years.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, for something like that, you'd want to be as close to fully educated as possible, I would
Yeah,
imagine. It's a lot
yeah,
different than careers where it's no one's life is on the line. It's very minimal risk.
yeah. That's definitely one of those where like a mistake in our field is much different than a mistake when you're, you know, building a cabinet or something.
Yeah. Not a bring your kid to work day sort of a thing where it's like, here, try it out, Billy.
Yeah, I mean we have like ride along programs, but that's
Yeah.
generally one of those like not in the medical field.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh yeah, we put them on the fire truck and they go around with the firefighters and they basically stand by the trucks because things could get crazy.
All right, kid, get in there, put the fire out. There's a family in there that needs your help. You go ahead and carry them out.
Yeah,
I'm
hold
only
on to this
6.
hose. It's putting out 100 foot-pounds of water pressure per minute, but you'll be fine.
Yeah. I remember when I was a kid and I say like 10, 8, something like that. Like I remember being in like a child at school and they had the fire trucks come in and they set up, it's been so long, I've hardly remember, but I know they set up some sort of a display that they would help us hold the hose and shoot the display with the water. And yeah, it's, you know, as a kid, it's like, oh, this is crazy.
Yeah,
As an
I
adult, it's
mean,
probably like also kind of crazy.
yeah, it's still super fun for us. Like, just it's different size hose. We use like very small hoses when we're working with kids in the public, and
Mm,
then when we're, you know, obviously fighting a fire, we use very large hoses, and so there's a
yeah.
lot more pressure. But like, it's still fun to grab a line and run up to the edge of a fire and slide on your knees and spray water all over the place. Like, it's still a fun time.
I just imagine trying to get like just do it like pulling off stunts while doing it. Like they used to mention sliding on your knees. Like I just picture like sliding on your knees like towards the edge of like a stage, like that sort of a thing. Just like, yeah.
Well, they
It's
do
like
have the
posing.
Firefighter Olympics, and if you've never seen those are an absolutely wild watch because they'll like run off the back of a moving truck with two
Good
people
grief.
carrying a ladder and they like throw the ladder at a building, and while it's still going at the building, a dude is running up the ladder. It's insane.
That's like something you'd see in like a medieval fantasy movie where they're climbing the ladder as it's getting lifted up to climb over the wall of a castle.
Yeah, genuinely, I've seen them, and I was thinking at first, I was like, oh, Firefighter Olympics, that sounds like a lot of fun, and then I saw the videos and I was like, not on my life.
It's just people trying to do the craziest thing imaginable.
Yeah, they're like, well, we got to set record times, which means we got to be doing 7 things at the same time, and some of those are really dangerous.
I have to check that out now. That sounds hilarious.
Yeah, it's worth a good Google if anybody's out there on YouTube just looking for something to watch. Firefighter Olympics, they're pretty wild.
Nice. Awesome. So, do you still do any firefighting related work at all, or is it all paramedic work? Like, how does that work currently?
Currently, I don't do any of it. I kind of
Oh,
retired from the field
oh,
after my 12-year mark. I just kind of stepped back and said, you know what, this is really not very good for me. Like, it's not a safe career to be in if I want to
Mhm.
get married and start a family. And I had those thoughts after being like shot and stabbed and tear
Yeah,
gassed and maced and everything else in the world, where I'm like, oh, maybe this isn't a very safe career.
fair enough. I None of that happens to me on the daily basis.
I don't
If
recommend it. It's not like an awesome time, but some people are
if I
like,
get tear gassed, something has gone horribly wrong. It means either someone else or the police have broken into my home and are raiding it or something.
that's right, you're getting swatted right now.
Yeah.
This was a whole setup. I'm calling them right now.
Yeah. I
No,
mean, if
I
it is
mean,
the police, I guess I have a higher chance of also being shot, but
well,
preferably neither of those things will happen.
hopefully not. But
Yeah.
yeah, and some of those I like volunteered for were like, I've voluntarily been tased.
Hmm.
Um, I wasn't voluntarily pepper sprayed, but that was a whole other thing.
I've
And
been
then
pepper sprayed. Not great.
no, it's not wonderful. I voluntarily locked myself in a hot ambulance just to see like what my vitals would do on the charts, just because
Interesting.
that's the mindset of a paramedic, is we're
Mhm.
like, oh, I wonder what it's like for someone experiencing being locked in a hot car. Like, what do their vitals do? What does it feel
Yeah.
like? And so I'm like, well, it's a hot day out today. Let's go lock me in the ambulance.
Interesting. Yeah. No, it is like I can appreciate the wanting to know what it's like from the other side of things because it if you haven't experienced it, there might not be quite the sense of urgency that would normally be required, perhaps.
Yeah, and it becomes a lot easier to see some of those things once you've been through them. Like, I had
Mm.
appendicitis when I was like 22 or 23 or
Yeesh.
something,
Yeah.
and I can now like spot it across a room. I'm like, that's appendicitis. So I'm like, I notice those symptoms because I've had those symptoms and I know how miserable they are. So that same thing where you're like, oh, I know how hard it is to breathe in a locked car after 10 minutes or something. So I know like the first things they want is to get cooled down and to breathe.
Yeah. Do you ever like you've seen it? I'm sure you've seen it on like shows or whatever. But like the whole like cat in the tree, the firemen have to come and get it out of the tree. Have you ever had to deal with not necessarily just firefighting but paramedic work, like deal with calls that aren't particularly serious, maybe?
Oh,
And it's just
yeah.
sort of a yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's one of those that, like, especially when I was working for a private company, it gets really bad. Like, they don't take things seriously if they don't need to. And so I remember coming on to shift and they said, hey, we have a call for you.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, well, I just got here. I need 30 minutes to prep my rig. So you should probably send somebody else. And they said, well, the call's already been waiting for 3 hours. I'm like, somebody called 911 and you've had them waiting for 3 hours and you want them to wait another half hour? Like, what happened? And so I prepped my rig and they sent me the call and fire is waiting there. They're like super angry because no one's been there to transport or take over care. And it's a lady with a cat scratch. And I'm like, okay, in no way, shape, or form was this a 911 call necessary. I'm not transporting you for it. Like, if you really want to go, I'll take you to the hospital waiting room, but like, it's going to be pretty embarrassing for you to sit there for another 9 hours before they see you because this is not an emergency of any sort.
Good grief. Yeah, like I mean, I'm sure you've heard it as well. Like just online, YouTube, whatever, just all of the like ridiculous 911 calls. Like there's ones where it's like kids not doing their homework or people just being generally confused. And it's interesting to see how people react to a lot of those.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good like community policing that goes on in those where they're like a kid calls because they saw a raccoon, and it's
Mhm.
an excellent chance for, a first responder of any shape or form to go out there and just say like, "Well, let's work on it together."
Yeah.
Build some community trust or something, but some of those times like we're getting that call at 3 in the morning. And if I've been on a 48-hour shift, like I'm 40 something hours into my 48-hour shift and I
Yeah.
don't want to wake up.
I have to imagine too, there's a lot of instances where departments are understaffed to where they can't go out and be like, just taking the time to handle those sorts of cases as well.
Yeah, I know that's a particular issue for two different reasons between private medical and the fire service.
Mm-hmm.
In the fire service, like, you desperately want to have more people, but you have budget restraints, based on what you're
Okay.
getting
Yeah.
funding for. So you're always trying to do the most you can with the least number of people, despite wanting more people.
Mm.
On the private side, they will hire the bare minimum requirement. And so while the employees are asking for more people, the management's like, we're trying to see if we can eliminate another one.
Yeah.
Very different problems.
Makes sense. Yeah. No, that I can see that. So I know, like, obviously, paramedic firefighter side of things. I know one of the things you mentioned was a freelance artifact hunter. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I work with a couple of different history based shows. So some
Mm-hmm.
podcasts, some TV stuff, um, to basically like go out and find historical artifacts
Mm-hmm.
just, to show on their shows to either bring up a topic or help drive a point home or just for a laugh, something like that.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of been all over and I've picked up, things that probably should have amazed me where I'm like, the thing in my hand is 5,000 years old. And it just kind of like glosses over now where I'm like, yeah, but it's only 5,000 years old. Where I'm like, I've held stuff now that's millions of years old. So it just gets lost. But then there's these beautiful moments where you're like, oh, this is a one of a kind thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
if this thing fell off the truck or burst into flames, like it would just be gone forever. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that's a really cool moment to just like feel that rush of like, look what I recovered.
So what is that process like? Are you just scouring for like flea markets and things like that to see like where you can find specific items that are requested?
Some of it, I've gone
Mm-hmm.
through some local sources. A lot of it is me reaching out to people who work in specific industries.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I had a request for some very old film cells, which is
Okay.
the kind of reels that they would use in like very old projectors.
Mm-hmm.
And so they wanted, like original film cells from Terminator 2.
Yeah.
And so I would just reach out to somebody who has like worked in that field, at a studio or at a projector, in a theater house, and they happen to have those. And sometimes they're like just kind of cutting up these old films and like selling off parts of them. And so I'm like, yeah, let me see what you got, and I'll try and pick out some good ones.
That's neat. Yeah, no, one of the issues I've had is trying to find film that I can. I have a really old like Super 8 box camera, and it uses a cassette film, and everyone we found isn't not in working order. The cassette, and it's. I bet if I worked harder at it, I could find some. I spent probably like 20 minutes, but it's fascinating like what people just have that they don't realize like what it is or the value of stuff.
Yeah,
And then on
certainly.
the other side of things too is people who have things that are old and thus assume that it's valuable.
Yeah, I've run into a lot of those where they're like, look at this thing, it's 200 years old. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, well, I've never heard of it, which isn't a
Yeah.
great sign. So let me look it up. And I look and I'm like, oh, it was a mass production. So even though it's 200 years old, like there's 10 million of them out there. So,
Yeah. Yeah. We had a thing recent, I don't know, sometime last year with my grandfather. He has like all these old fishing lures. And he's like, look out, this is from like the early 1900s. Like, that's got to be worth some money. I'm like, but you don't know that it has any value. I mean, like,
yeah.
just because it's the same thing with like how Beanie Babies were, right? Everyone
Hmm.
assumed like, oh, it's a collectible, so it's worth money. It's like, yeah, but if everyone has them, they're not. Nobody needs to spend a bunch of money to get one. That's how
Yeah.
I
And I've
see
had
it.
some of those where people are like, I found these really old handmade nails. They're square. And I'm like,
Mm,
oh, that's interesting, but not unique. Like all nails were square until we figured out how to make them round.
yeah,
Versus somebody who's like, hey, I found an ancient Roman crucifixion nail. And I'm like, okay, that's worth some money.
yeah, yeah. That's how I see Funko Pops going,
Yeah.
where they're big now. People collect them, and they're like, oh, like I found a family member that has legitimately like maybe thousands. I don't know how many there are. He's got as many as he possibly can, And he's like, yeah, one of these days you're gonna be jealous when I sell it for a bunch of money. I'm like, nah, like I don't think you will. I think you'll get 85% of your money back at best.
Yeah, there's
I'm
a
like,
lot of
they're
those that they're like, they sell at 15 bucks, and then I walk into a store and they're selling them for 10. And I'm like,
yeah,
it didn't do well on the market, huh?
yeah. It because it's one of the things where the only valuable ones are the ones that you get at like conventions where there's like 100 of them handed out at the convention, and that's it. But everyone that he has is one that he just bought at like Target.
Yeah,
It's like that's not valuable. There's like 10 million of those made.
yeah. Yeah, there's
And you
so
could be
many
buying
of these,
for
there's a
a few
vinyl
thousand
shortage.
each. Yeah, I don't know. Are you so obviously you hunt down like the artifacts? Are you a collector as well, or not particularly?
I do if I find something like particularly cool. I'm like, well, I'm gonna hold on to this one just because I don't know anybody that wants it,
Yeah.
but I kind of want it, and so I'll like hold on to it. So I've got some, like an old Korean sword around here somewhere that has like a founder's carving, which is
Mhm.
from like this dragon mythos, and all
Interesting.
this nice handmade blades, and it's like several hundred years old or something.
Mhm.
And I'm like, it's super cool. I don't know anyone that wants it particularly for anything because it's not like a popular historical topic,
Yeah.
but it's really cool to own versus some of that stuff. Like, I before I even pick it up, I have somebody that needs it.
Mhm. So you'll collect individual items, but not like a collection of one particular type of item necessarily.
Yeah, most of the time there's not a lot of, I mean, there's value in it, but it's
Mm.
also extremely challenging to say. Like, Caligula spintria was a type of coin used in ancient Rome.
Mhm.
Um, and so it has like this big history about, how you couldn't spend money with the emperor's face and all this other kind of stuff. And there's like 15 of them. I'm
Yeah.
like, I would love to hunt these down, but to find 15 of these different coins across the world, like, it's going to
Mhm.
be so challenging, and there may not even be one of them. And so like the collection just may never be complete. So I'm
Yeah.
like, if I want a 20-year mission, like, that would be cool, but in my history I think I found 3. So I'm like, well, probably wouldn't have a full collection.
Yeah, I've never been the type to like I mean I got I'm it's been a while, but I got really into like Magic the Gathering, and so I have a ton of cards. That's probably the closest thing I have to like collection of stuff. I have a lot of artwork, but it's not part of a specific set or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
I ran into a guy, while I was doing some hunting, that does like Magic the Gathering high-end card collection.
mm,
And he showed me his binder, which is never a good sign, but he's like, "Look at this binder. It's worth more than my house." I'm
jeez,
like, "Wow,
yeah,
that's
not
impressive,
if
but also
I,
you should just sell it and buy a house."
yeah, I'm not like that. I buy a lot of the sets and then we play the game with them. I don't care about like whether or not it gets bent or whatever, which I
Yeah.
imagine that's why he has it in a binder to keep it safe.
Yeah, probably.
I
I
just
have a
have
ton of them, just like, going to some of the local auctions and stuff, as they're like, "Will anyone give me $1 for this gigantic
a,
box of cards?" And I'm like,
yeah,
"I'll give you $1 just so we can move on with this auction."
yeah I don't know. I think part of it is I don't like having stuff just for the sake of having stuff.
Yeah.
I'm constantly going around and like clearing out my house and donating stuff and getting rid of it because I just can't be bothered.
Yeah. Well, and I have a massive collection of art, for 2 reasons. Number 1, I think art is valuable if you enjoy it.
Hmm.
So, like, even if it's mass produced, if you like it, it's valuable to you, versus like I have a ton of original art that's out in sealed cases that just sits there. I'm like, I
Yeah.
like it, but most of all, like, it's a tax purpose thing. Because if you
Yeah.
donate original art, like, you can get tax breaks. So I'm like, cool, well, I'm just gonna write off my tax breaks.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I have a couple of posters here in the office that were handmade for me, which I think is cool. I've got some topographical maps of the local area that were printed like early 1900s, which I just thought looks pretty neat. So I got them custom framed, you know, just some general art, like film artwork.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, that's really cool. I mean, like, I have a collection room that has original art on the walls just because
Mhm.
they're like, I thought they were really well done, like oil paintings of famous landmarks that I've never seen before.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, yeah, I like to have them on the walls. And then I have a bunch, like all of the other stuff in the rest of my house and studio is all just like canvas prints. So I'm like,
Mhm.
there's nothing unique about it at all.
Fair enough. So what is the process like for you? Someone's comes up to you, messages you and says, "Hey, I have this show. We're trying to, talk about this particular time period or something. Could you source us, this item that we can use to display or whatever?" Like, how does
Yeah.
that go?
I mean, you even use the right term. Source is the the term we
Mhm.
use to say like go find it and verify its authenticity.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, somebody will reach out and say like, "Hey, I'm doing, a piece on the Magna Carta." And they're
Mhm.
like, "We just want anything from that time period." I'm like, "Okay, that's much easier than saying like, go steal the Magna Carta like you're Nicolas Cage or something."
Yeah.
And and so I'm like, "Okay, well, I can find anything from that time period with relative ease." Like, I think their Jetu coins were like so prevalent at that time period that they were paid for things by the barrel, and they used to just roll off of ships into the ocean or into the river. Uh,
Yeah.
and so it's like they're everywhere. I can find you one of those in the next 5 minutes. Like, it's incredibly easy to do versus, especially like older things that are delicate materials, I think
Mhm.
is probably the hardest one. So I was on a hunt for, um, oh man, I don't even remember his name now, but it's this old French author, and they wanted one of his original writings. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, number one, this is going to be expensive. Like, I'm going to have to go travel to find this thing. Um, it's going to be expensive. It's going to be old. It probably won't be in great condition because, like, written materials don't last that long.
Yeah.
When you want something like 200, 300 years old, like, it's got to be extremely well preserved for me to even find it because otherwise it'll just deteriorate and turn into, a goo or a dust or depending on where it's stored. So I'm like, that's really hard, but I'll go find one.
Yeah.
And I think it took me like 6 months at one point to find one of these books. But once I did, I was like, this is an incredible book. It's in perfect condition. It's stored immaculately. Like, this is their price. It's non negotiable. And they'll just say, like, done. I'm like, good. Thank you.
Nice. But have there ever been like items that uh, you really had to like finagle like and haggle with the person in order to get them to sell it or provide it to you in some capacity?
Yeah, at some point, people are like, this is part of my collection and I'm trying to make a full set.
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, well, what if I buy out your entire collection, or like try and get them to give up just one part's very difficult.
Hmm.
I think those are probably the ones I've struggled with most, and most of the time I don't end up getting them
Yeah.
because I'm like, look, I want book 3 of this 4-part series, and they're like, well, 3 is the rarest one. I have 1 and 2 already, and I'm trying to get 4.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh crap. Like, well, you've already got 3 of them. There's no way you're gonna let this go. But I'll like make a convincing argument and try and sell them on it,
Hmm.
and I'm like, if I ever run into another one, like, I'll let you know. They're like, no, you go find another one and you can have that one.
Is there a specific item that you uh, like or would be interested in trying to find? Maybe.
Um, I
I know
th-
you mentioned the coins earlier. Is
yeah,
there?
I mean, Caligula Spentry are definitely like very cool things to have. Um, I don't know. I really like, founding material. So something
Mhm.
that's, incredibly old that was responsible for some major turn in a civilization or a time period like that.
Yeah.
I can't think of one that's specifically off my head, but even like Amarna faience beads is a thing that they had. They're called mummy beads. They're from a specific area, and there are some that I had found that predate the use of copper, and so they're different colors than the one that came after that. And I was like, this is really cool because it's so old I can date it. Like the
Yeah,
amount of time it was made is 3,500 years ago, because that's when they started using copper, so it has to be older than that. I think those ones are
interesting.
really cool.
Neat.
Probably
Yeah,
dinosaur bones. I think dinosaur bones would be a really cool
oh,
one to have, but I have no idea how to even start working with, paleontologists.
yeah. I'd looked into that before actually because I was interested in seeing if you could buy like a skull for like a raptor or something. Uh, Needless to say, wildly out of my budget, if
Yeah.
I remember correctly. I forget how it worked out.
So
Or
I have a dinosaur egg,
interesting, nice.
which is really cool because it's like fossilized in the egg form. So there's like chipped away pieces of the shell, and you could see like where the embryo would have been.
Hmm.
Um, and I like got that off of a local hunter, as I was telling somebody like, oh yeah, I'm out here looking for, X, Y, or Z artifact. And
Hmm.
he said, like, I found this thing and I think you'd like it. I said, okay, show it to me, like, for sure. And he showed it to me, and I'm like, oh, this is like a legitimate dinosaur egg. I don't have enough experience to say that, but I think that's what it is. And he goes,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's what it is too. And I said, I'll give you $100 for it. He's like, okay. So I just handed him $100. I had to go take it to a museum and be like, hey, can you 3D scan this? Do whatever it is you guys do, and then tell me if it's legitimate or not. And they're like, it is, and we'll buy it from you. And I was like, no, I want to keep it.
Yeah. I remember that. What was the other one? Like mammoth tusks is big, like up in like Siberia or something. They have like the permafrost, which is like melting away, thawing out, and so they just have all of these tusks and bones and things that they're just selling off. Just somewhat problematic, to be honest. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's fascinating. I saw a guy, the one company I work with does like epoxy furniture, and they look at this one guy on YouTube that does all sorts of like epoxy and like specialty furniture designs. And one of the things he did was a mammoth tusk, and he just ruined it. He has
Oh,
like I don't remember how many subscribers. We'll say it's like 2 million subscribers maybe or something. I'm not entirely sure. And so like big enough that you know people are gonna see it
yeah.
and be like, oh, I could do that. And he took it, he he like sanded the whole thing down, which was already unfortunate.
Mm.
Then he put on like this like specialty like conversion varnish finish or some sort of finish on it, and then he drilled a hole into the base of it and put it on like a foot long metal rod to like support it so it was like standing up. And I just remember looking at that, and like I have family members that work in various sciences, and I remember the one of them saying like that's gonna be destroyed within a year. So like he's ruined the exterior of it, so it's just gonna like crumble away. And the fact that he drilled into it, the pole wasn't tall enough to support the weight of it properly, so it's eventually just gonna snap in half and fall over. I
God.
was like, that is awful.
Yeah,
Like,
that's one of those where I'm like, you can't go back and get another one. Like that piece of history is just,
yeah,
destroyed. Like we can't get any more. So there's now a scarcity problem.
yeah, it's so disheartening. Not that I would know how to preserve it properly myself, but I know that's not the way to do it.
Yeah.
Drilling, if you the second you drill a giant hole into any ancient artifact, it's ruined in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely shouldn't be doing modern modifications to like ancient stuff.
No.
Where you're like, yeah, I
Uh,
found this, 3,000-year-old coin. I'm gonna drill a hole through the center so I can wear it as a necklace. Please don't do
yeah.
that. Please.
Like like again, it's out of my area of expertise. Like I know there's like ways you can, coat things so that it preserves them when they're out in like in a nox, exposed to the elements.
Yeah.
Obviously that's what they do with museums with skeletons and things like that. But yeah, the fact that anyone could just go out and buy anyone that can afford to, at least with the funding, that can just go out and buy all these like skeletal remains of these ancient creatures and then just destroy them is
Yeah.
so upsetting.
Well, and that's one of those like handing over artifacts. I don't necessarily know what their end goal is. And so I'm
Mm.
like, I handle it very carefully, secure it very carefully, like I've got 3 forms of wrap and, cooling and all kinds of stuff in a sealed case. I handle
Yeah.
it with like white gloves, and then I hand it over to people and I see it later and people are like just holding it casually in like their bare hand, waving it around to make a point. I'm like, okay, well, that's not what I'd have done, but okay, I guess that's fine.
Yeah, it's like I know back when I was in school, we would do that with different like in our chemistry class or whatever, and it'd be like sort of the same principle of like just not taking the proper care with something, where it's just like, oh, here, this is super old, like this is super delicate, mix it, and the kids are just like dumping it in. It's like, man, there are some people that just shouldn't be around things that require delicacy.
Yeah. What do you mean I can't pour bleach and chlorine into the sink at the same time?
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like,
that or like
okay.
I have a little brother who's like who's 10 years old, and I remember showing him like some of like my old books. Like I have an old Shakespeare, like a collection of Shakespeare, and I was actually given to me by my dad. And it's one of those where you open, like you have to be careful opening it up because it'll just crumble in your hands. And I
Yeah.
was showing it to him, and he goes to like just flip the page. I'm like, please God, no. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
There's a handful of those that I've seen where it's like, please be careful. I've also run into some stuff where I'm like, this looks like a one of a kind printing, and as I go through and like try and decipher it, because there's no way I speak this many languages, much less read them or anything else. I'm
yeah,
looking at it and I'm trying to decipher it with like Google Translate, and I'm like, I think this is a treasure map. And I like have to contact a specialist to be like, what does this actually translate to? And they're like, you're an idiot. It's a map. I'm like, okay, is it a map to treasure? And they're like, no, it's just a local map. I'm like, oh,
yeah.
got it. Geological survey from 1500.
Yeah, oh, that's the question I do want to ask you as well. Is like how you go about authenticating the things you're sourcing.
Yeah, so some of them like they have to come from a specific area. So like I was asked to if I could find something from Karahan Tepe, which is like one of the oldest found civilizations on Earth with like a
Mhm.
10,000-year-old history, or a 10,000 BC history, a 12,000-year-old total. And I
Mhm.
was like, okay, in order for me to get anything, I number one have to go there, physically go there. Because it is controlled by the government of that country, I then need to speak to the government of that country, then to the archaeologists that are doing work on it, and then like try and negotiate a price with a contract that says I'm allowed to leave with it. So some of that can be like extraordinarily, down in the minutia where you're like, I have to get so close to the place it's coming out of the ground and
Mhm.
then talk them out of it versus like, I've had some people reach out and just say like, hey, I found this spearhead from 60 AD in Jerusalem. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, like send it to me. I can reasonably have that authenticated based on its shape, deterioration, and the location you found it.
Mhm.
Like that's easy enough because we're just dating metal. So I'm like, if you
Yeah.
want to just date metal, like I can just find a guy that just can tell me how old a metal is.
Makes sense. Yeah, no, it's 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 interesting to me, like trying to figure out like how to validate something because anyone can say like, oh no, this is an authentic, like I'll make up like this is an authentic document from the founding of the country or whatever, and anyone can say that, and it's like, all right, well, I'm not an expert in this field. How do I find someone who is an expert in the field? And then like, especially with particular like niche products or items,
Yeah.
uh,
Well, and I've had
you
those
could say,
people will, because like a certificate of authenticity is not like a thing.
mhm,
That's not a thing that we have just like from your casual person.
yeah,
Um, so a lot of times I will like get stuff and they're like, "Oh, here's a certificate of authenticity that goes with it, so I know it's real." And I'll look at it and be like, "Oh, look, it has an eagle on this one. Isn't that pretty?" I'm like,
yeah,
this means nothing to me. Like I could have printed this on my computer and it would be exactly as valid as yours. Like it means absolutely nothing. You just put the name of a thing you hope it is on it.
yeah. Yeah, it's hard, especially with the way the internet works too. Like if you're trying to just from the point of like a consumer, like trying to buy something and to see if it's authentic or not. And it's like I have no way of like uh, anything with like a famous person's signature on it. There's just no way to validate it without seeing it. And if you're trying to purchase it online, it's like I have no way to know at a certain
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, that's one. Like, I haven't dealt with like authorized stuff, so stuff that's been signed, but it would be a
Mhm.
nightmare to like track down the one dude who can validate those signatures.
Yeah, yeah. I know. Like, too. There are people that go out to like conventions and they'll just have like an actor, for example, just sign like 10 things for them, and then they
Mhm.
sell that, and that's like their whole thing is just getting people to sign a bunch of things at once for them and selling them.
Yeah, I mean it's popular at conventions, and some of that is like the way stuff is brought into the country too. There's some weird rules on like importing and having to have those permissions, like I said, that I've seen like shows on TV that are like the border security, and they're checking imports, coming through like airplane terminals, and
Yeah.
they're like, "Oh, well, this looks like a really old helmet." And I'm like, I could tell you exactly when in the, history of Rome that thing came around. And then I have to watch them like try and go through the steps, and I'm like, it's painful, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Then I think people get the wrong idea about stuff too. They'll see shows like, how was that show? Pawn Stars, where it's like, this guy knows everything about everything. It's like, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
It's like, I think there's somebody off camera who has already vetted the person bringing an item in, and they've provided him a list of information to talk about.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of shows like that where you got to do like all of your research in pre-production and then,
Mm.
ship them out.
Yeah, History Channel in general. I mean, again, I don't watch a ton of it, but when we visit family, it's one of the things they watch. I'm like, I have my doubts about the validity of some of these things, especially when it's talking about aliens and like, what does that have to do with history?
Yeah, there's a lot of those I really enjoy where they're like, you watch them for the entertainment value and not necessarily for any
Mhm.
education value. Because
Yeah.
you're like, oh, they brought in this person that has a very fancy title or whatever, and you look them up and you're like, oh, that's just the name of their podcast. Like, that doesn't make them an expert on anything.
Yeah. It's like a bit of a darker term, but like it's like after September 11th when they had jaw rule on the news. It's like this guy's not an expert. He just lived in the area.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, and sometimes that's all they need to make it look valid enough that they're like, yeah, this guy can talk about it pretty confidently, so he must be great.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, I could do that. I could be confident about anything.
Yeah. That's half the job, honestly, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's just having the confidence of it.
Fair enough. One of the last things I want to touch on too is your podcast, the Just Dumb Enough podcast. I know you mentioned that you kind of settle on a topic and you're able to ease your way into it enough, but not become an expert on a specific topic. Like, what was the background of your show? Like, how did it come about? What got you into it?
Yeah, so after I left EMS, 21, I had just kind of thought, like, I want to I love listening to podcasts, but I wanted to find one that covered a different topic constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm like, oh, I love learning about psychology, but if you listen to 10 psychology shows in a row, you've inevitably heard the same statistic like 6 times.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, oh, I need more variety than this because I want to keep learning. And I just didn't find the show I was looking for. And so I said, screw it. I can buy a microphone. I'm sure it's not that hard. I was quickly found out how badly mistaken I was. It is, in fact, very challenging.
Yeah.
And, I just started asking people because I'm like, I don't understand a lot about, psychics. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, I'm going to invite a psychic on the show and I'm going to ask some probably very dumb questions with the understanding that, like, I don't know anything about what you do. Please help me learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so the show almost works like a springboard for other topics. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, if you come to us and you enjoyed happiness, as like a topic, you can then go find a show that specializes in happiness. And sometimes it's from the guest, and sometimes it's just at random. but I helped you find another thing you enjoy, and so maybe you'll come back to do it again and again. And that's kind of how the audience works, is they're like, I just went and did a 3-page story on narcissism because I heard it on your show. And I'm like, okay, good for you.
Nice. Do you have, is there like a, not a specific person necessarily, but like a topic you'd like to have a guest on to cover that you'd be particularly interested in?
There's a couple that I'm like, I'd really like just something because they're like, it'd be a cool guest.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always said, like, anyone who led a nation in some capacity, like a president, a dictator, a prime minister, whatever it is, would be very interesting just to hear, the story of like, how do you manage a country,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of how you managed it? Like, what is that process even like?
I
So I
mean,
think that's my dream interview, is like, I want to interview, an ex-president or an ex-prime minister or something. I think it'd be really fun. But I'm also like, that's a really hard person to reach out to.
I wonder if you could find the royal family of Sealand, if
Oh
you're aware of what that is,
yeah.
because they're very well known location, but also they're just normal people
Yeah.
to an extent. I wonder how that would work out.
Yeah. I'd love to do that. Like, here's the super small one, and then we'll do a giant one somewhere down the line when we get enough clout.
Yeah, you're like, special guest today is what was your name? Barack Obama. It's like,
Is that how you pronounce it?
is that how you pronounce it? B. Just get way too friendly.
Yeah. Just way too personal with them. Thanks for coming, B. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate your time. Doesn't seem like you got a whole lot else going on right now, to be honest, but
Yeah,
I'll
send you a text later and see what's up.
We can't all be winners.
Yeah. It's all right. I understand.
Yeah. It's, yeah, I've been fortunate. I've been able to talk. Like, there's never been like a one person in particular I've wanted to talk to on our show, but I've gotten to talk to people in like every field that I've been interested in. Like, we've had people that have worked in film. We've had a number of directors, like producers on. Nobody's like famous, but they work in that industry, so it's super cool to talk to. Like, I'm a big fan of like writing, so plenty of authors, indie authors, um, just any like game developers, like anyone and everyone. I've been really fortunate to be able to talk to people in those industries. The only thing I haven't done, which I would love to do, is do more like in person stuff, where it's like just go to an event and just interview people. But every time I think of doing that, I'm like, man, there's already so many people doing that. Like, I don't want to be one more guy also harassing people. Essentially, it's like, tell me about what you're doing here. We have enough man on the street content that I feel like I don't need to do it.
Yeah. I mean, there's always a desire for more content out there, right? Like, the world is ever expanding, but
Yeah.
I get it. Like, this show, I thought I would be walking into like random businesses and asking people like, "Hey, I know you've been pumping my gas for the last couple of years. How'd you like to come on the show and talk about that?" And within like 7 episodes or something, I was talking to a millionaire. I'm like, I
Nice.
don't know how I got here, but this is really weird.
Yeah, I think that's part of the thing that people don't realize. It's like they assume, oh, this person will never come on, so they don't even bother to ask. And it's like, if you just ask, like, a lot of people will just say yes because they're curious.
Well, and that was like when I started, there's no frame of reference. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're like, oh, this person's, had a TED talk and they're a best selling author. And now if I hear that, they're like, yeah, I had a TED talk and a best selling author. I'm
Mm.
like, okay, but like, what else? What else is going on in your life?
Yeah.
So I'm like,
Do you have anything
everybody that comes on the
interesting
show
going
is a
on?
best selling author.
Yeah. No, it is interesting. Like, that, and just in general, like when I've talked to people, is the hesitancy around things, uh, particularly with like, oh, I want to like, I feel like it's too much of a commitment to, focus on my content. And I'm like, okay, it's fine. Just know, like, you have, like, I'll use YouTube as an example. I'm like, if you want to make YouTube your career, you have to treat it like it's your career before it is.
Yeah.
And believe me, I understand why people don't just jump right into it. It's kind of reckless. Um, at the same time, it's if you don't put the work in, it's very difficult to have success.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Well, and that's one of those, if I'm like, you need to spend 6 hours a week on podcasting or something, that's usually the general number I give people,
Mhm.
where I'm like, if you do one episode a week, you're going to spend 6 hours a week on stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm like, if it was 6 hours a week for the next year before you started making, enough money to cover like your hobbies, is that enough? Do you care if even all it does is pay for itself, but you get to keep talking to fun people? Is that worth it for you? People are like, well,
Mhm.
yeah, that's worth it for me. And I'm like, then why aren't you doing it? Like it's 6 hours of your time, and it's people that care about your content, and it's things you want to do. Like, you should just go do that.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's weird like that. There's others too that people run into where it's making excuses why they can't do it instead of just going for it. Where it's like, oh, I'd love to, make videos. It's like, okay, well, why don't you? I don't know how. It's like the internet exists. You can go for it. Or I mean, I'm guilty of doing this myself a lot of times of like writing, where it's like, oh, I'd love to like write short stories, whatever. It's like, okay, you have access to I'm sure you can find pen and paper. We're communicating over the internet, which leads me to believe that you have a digital device of some sort that you can type into and share it. Like it, yeah. There's
Yeah, with 60 free softwares out there for any hobby you want, like there's no reason you couldn't get into it for almost no cost.
yeah, and I mean, anytime there's like a paid service, there's almost always also going to be like a free knockoff version of it as well.
Oh yeah, guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean, I see it all the time. Like they'll show like the big subscription based program, like Adobe, all the Adobe programs. It's like, oh, the free versions of all of these. It's like, okay, that's everything people need to get started in any of those areas. Have at it.
Yeah, I think most people would be shocked by like the people that actually need a pro service usually have an employee that is working on that service, which is why it's a pro version of it. Because
Mhm.
if it's just you by yourself, like you probably will never get to the point where you need all those features.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of times, like companies aren't not always, obviously, but there's many instances where companies aren't interested in making money off of individuals. It's not worth it for them, right? That, like you said, like a lot of people don't need all the major features. If it's kind of a bad example, but like let's say you need Adobe Premiere. If you have an entire company whose job is to edit content, like do video content for companies, maybe you have 100 employees. Your company now is now buying like 100 copies of Adobe Premiere, whereas an individual doing it for personal use, Adobe doesn't care as much. I mean, obviously, Adobe wants money from everyone; they're greedy, but it's situations like that. I guess WinRAR is the best example. I don't know if anyone really uses it anymore, but back in the day, I mean, it's free. They didn't care if individuals, paid for it or not. But if a business pays for it, that's what they're looking at because the business is buying however many licenses for it.
Yeah.
And
I mean, the same thing. Like, I have ad blocker on my Chrome
yeah.
extension, and it constantly, when it updates, it's like, hey, would you like to give us money? And I'm like,
Mhm.
no. And they're like, okay,
No.
we understand.
It's like, no, I don't think I will.
Yeah. I mean, WinRAR was like famous for it. Every time it popped up, it's like, hey, please buy our thing. And then you just like click no. And it's like, all
Yeah.
right, well, go ahead and keep using it, I guess.
It's like, thanks, we'll go hungry another day.
Yeah.
It's like, yep.
Yeah, sorry, man. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. No, I don't. Ad blocker is so I'm so back and forth on it. One, because it's like, yeah, I hate seeing ads. But then two, it's like, all right, but I work in marketing, like advertising is my thing.
Yeah.
It's like I'm actively like contributing to fucking over the people I'm trying to help at a certain point.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those where, like, if a website has extremely intrusive ads where I'm like, oh, this is
Mhm.
just covering up all my content, Like, I'll
Yeah.
just hardcore block everything that's on the screen. Otherwise, like, I'll forget to turn it on sometimes. Or I'm like, yeah, it's a banner ad or something. I didn't even really look at it, but it's there, I guess.
There, if a web, there's so many websites where I go to and like 2/3 of the screen are covered in pop-ups of some sort. I just leave. I can't be bothered. I'm like, I don't even care about blocking the ads at this point. It's like your formatting sucks. I'm
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah, I know for a while I was like, well, I'm going to use, Brave on my phone as a
Mhm.
browser because it just hardcore blocks everything. And then I realized, like, yeah, but Chrome is a lot easier for me to manage, so I'm just going to keep using it. And if there's ads, I'm just going to ignore the whole site.
Yeah. My the ads I get are bizarre. Just because I work with all sorts of people in so many industries, it's just it's not like most people it's based around their interests. For me, I'm getting so many like random things. It's like, oh, here's, buy like women's clothing and stuff. It's like I have no interest in this ad. It's like I don't need this. It's like, oh, you need like new uh like strollers, like hair care products, whatever. I'm like, I no.
Yeah, I get that a lot just based on like whatever guest is upcoming on the
Yeah,
show. I
sure,
will
that
get the
makes
most
sense. Yeah.
random stuff where it's like, would you like to buy the new Corvette ZR1? I'm like, well, that's $150,000
Oh,
car,
yeah.
so I would love to own one, but I will not buy one. And then it's like, how about a budget book for Olympic swimmers? I'm like, what? What?
Yeah, it's broken. It's so broken at this point. It doesn't help either with the way they're using AI to train AI, where it just ruins itself, which is hilarious, but also awful.
Yeah, the amount of content I've seen now where you can just look at something and you're like, oh, this is super AI like written. Like I can
Mhm.
tell just at a glance that it's AI. I'll just
Yeah,
leave because I'm like, you clearly didn't put any work into this.
yeah. It's I AI can be a useful tool in a number of instances, but the way people are just latching onto it in order to avoid doing the actual work required on a task is so annoying to me. The
Yeah,
I mentioned before, like that furniture company I work with, they've gone all in on AI. Like instead of making a prototype of a product, they'll go into Midjourney and have it render out like a product, like a table or a bed or whatever. And they'll be like, cool, this is our new product. Can we make that? It looks like we can. And they'll throw that image up. They'll come up with like, they'll have a like Chat GPT generate a script, and then they'll have an AI, text to speech generator read the script out, and it's all AI. I'm like, you don't even make any of these products anymore. Like you're just using this to fill up your store with
yeah,
products that don't exist.
yeah. It's one of those where like AI is kind of like my show in where it's a great springboard. Like if you want to
Yeah.
use it to develop an outline for something, it's probably wonderful at it. If you
Mhm.
want it to like maybe, bounce some names off of for your business or something, it's probably great at that. But like it can in no way be your final product.
Yeah. So honestly, like the most useful thing I use AI for is in Photoshop, uh, where you can use it to eliminate like and fix images. Like if I have a photo of something, like it's one of the things they've promoted on like I think Samsung phones maybe. Like let's say you have a photo of people and there's just like a person in the background, or like there's an item in the background you don't want there. Photoshop, you could just circle it and remove it, and it just fixes it almost immediately. And that's super helpful. But using AI to generate full on imagery and videos and script, like it, you can tell. Like it's just so easy to tell.
Yeah. And I mean, most stuff out there, honestly, I look at it and I'm like, you can see that this is AI.
Yeah.
Like the picture is very clearly like either those lines are way too neat or
Hmm.
like there's no reason for this overlapping line to be here, so I know it's AI. I'm
Yeah.
like, you guys just didn't even do any like final edit on the picture itself. Like you should have
Mhm.
cleaned this up a little bit.
Well, that's the thing too. People don't know how to use AI properly, like what prompts to use. Like I'll make up an example like, oh, a Dodge Charger, and it'll render out a Dodge Charger of sorts. It'll look sort of like it, but it won't. it'll just look like crap because there's no detail to it. Like they're not adding in the other notes of like, oh, in a in a staged environment in a contemporary garage with natural light. Like they're not adding in all those other factors into it. They're just putting in the most basic prompt and using it.
Yeah,
And
they're not like sharpen lines, reduce flaws, remove bad
exactly, like
anatomy.
they
Like,
don't know how to use all of the extra little detailed points in the prompt, uh, and so it comes out looking terrible.
yeah. Well, I've seen people use it now for like, I guess you might call it nefarious purposes, but just
Mhm.
like ways it wasn't intended. Because you can't ask like Chat GPT, hey, who's going to win the fight on Saturday?
Yeah.
But you can ask it, write me a script for the most likely outcome of the fight on Friday.
Hmm.
And it will like write a prompt that'll tell you who it thinks is going to win. It's like,
Yeah.
well, given, if you're using like massively up to date software, like that might be accurate and you could use that to hedge your bets, I guess.
We had a guest on a couple months ago, maybe longer. I don't know. It all runs together at this point, where they're building a software where the whole point of it was like trying to predict the future, essentially. And it's fascinating to me. I don't know how it works. My Yeah, at the time I remember trying to understand it, and it was basically like not predict the future as in like, oh, this person's gonna win the Super Bowl or whatever. Like not like that. Is predict the future as far as like what people are interested in, based on like, oh, people are searching for baseball right now. Is baseball going to become more popular in the future because of what's popular as far as Google results and things like that? And it was super interesting. I just can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah. Well, and there's like, for every version we see in the public domain, there are some extremely advanced versions behind the scenes. Because I had a guy talking about AI and its impact on the movie industry.
Hmm.
And he had said Tyler Perry was looking to spend like $800 million or something ridiculous on new studio space. And he canceled his entire, like the entire plan, scrapped it indefinitely after someone showed him some really advanced AI stuff. He's like, oh, you know what? I'm not even going to use this. So I'm like, all right, well, somebody is seeing something I don't see, and I'd like to see it, but like, it's clearly they're doing some hard work behind the scenes.
Yeah, I don't know. We're at an interesting point where people are figuring out how to use AI, and I think we're gonna come back around to the point where they realize, okay, it's useful as a supplement, like a supplementary tool, not just to do the work for us.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it'll like speed up certain jobs. Like
Mhm.
it'll be able to do your Excel formatting very easily, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to like actually do your financial balancing and projecting, with
Mhm.
any level of certainty on your part. And you're like, I don't know if I trust this thing.
Yeah. Who knows? Anyway, that's actually all the topics I had written down here in my notes. I don't know if there's anything else you want to touch on before we wrap up here.
No, I mean, I just had a good time just sitting here chatting with you, and
Awesome.
hopefully, people found it enlightening or entertaining or
Yeah.
somewhat educational, maybe.
Awesome. Where can people go to check out your podcast?
Yeah, it should be available anywhere you go. Just dumb enough. I think the only place I'm not like regularly up to date is YouTube, and even on there, it's just like the audio waves. But if you go to Spotify or Apple, I think my most popular is Podbean.
Okay.
It's where like 90% of my audience is from, so Podbean's a pretty decent app to listen to, I guess.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, man. I really do appreciate you coming on. It was a fun chat.
Yeah, of course. I'd be happy to come back in and do it again. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And thank you everyone for listening. Really appreciate you guys taking the time. Uh, 238 episodes. We're closing in on 250. It's been exciting. So thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.